CESSRST, the Center for Earth System Science and Remote System Technology. Um, our host is our normal host is Dr. Collymore, who is Dr. Chris Collymore, who is the postdoc at CESSRST. But he asked me to host Dr. Alvarez. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Alvarez, who is assistant professor at the Department of Geological Sciences at UTEP, the University of Texas at El Paso. So it's not good morning to you. I guess it's good afternoon to you, Laura. I think it's good morning. In any case, I'm sitting in Puerto Rico at the moment. So Dr. Alvarez comes from the National University of Colombia at Medellin, where she got her bachelor's in civil engineering, or her degree in civil engineering. She has a master's and a PhD from the Arizona State University. And Laura will be talking to us about merging physically based numerical models and autonomous systems to study fluvial and water environments. So Laura, welcome, and thank you very much for joining our assessors seminar.
Well, thank you all for having me here. I hope you find this presentation enjoyable. The title of the presentation is Merging Physically Based Numerical Modeling and Autonomous Systems to Study Fluvial and Water Environments. Oops, okay, let's see. Okay, so the outline of the presentation, I will start with water-mediated environments monitoring and using unmanned systems, aerial and aquatic systems. I will explain what I have done during maybe the past 5 years in terms of structure from motion and development of autonomous boats. And after that, I will talk about numerical modeling in fluvial environments, looking at the turbulent flow, sediment transport, erosion and depositional processes, river bed evolution. And at the end, I have a slide of the overall picture of this presentation. So basically, these slides summarize the disciplines that I research, as well as the methodologies. In general, most of my research has been concentrated in fluvial geomorphology and geophysics in the overall area of water resources. I use emerging and geospatial techniques to approach and to answer the research questions I have and hypotheses that I found. And most of my research is, as I said, in numerical modeling. I also use autonomous systems and sensor integration. And most recently, machine learning. I have done also laboratory experiments, and the area that I have less experience is field campaigns. Now, let's look at the autonomous systems as emerging techniques to study water-mediated environments. And probably that title was true for in 2015, 2016. Unmanned aerial systems are a way to get rapid collection and cost-effective collection of data in both terrain and also submerged topography. Right now, there are more and more manuscripts and research in this area. So what I used to work with is in photogrammetry. So in this figure here, in your right-hand side at the top, this is how photogrammetry works. Basically, you attach a passive sensor to an unmanned aerial system, and using a post-processing kinematic GPS and through the ground station and the telemetry of the unmanned aerial system, it is possible to retrieve the coordinates of the images with an accuracy of centimeters. So it's just having this RGB camera with high resolution, taking a lot of pictures that overlap, it is possible to render a three-dimensional view of the terrain. If you work in remote sensing, I'm pretty sure you have, the technique clear. Now, I work more in autonomous boats or unmanned surface vehicle because of the nature of my work in terms of fluvial and water environments. In this case, I used active sensors, and specifically an echo sounder, to look at the features of a river or a reservoir, such as in this example, the velocity vectors in 3 dimension, as well as the depth of a riverbed or the depth of a lake, a pond, any type of water body. Um, because it's NOAA, I just want to show you some of the work that students have been done in the research center that I used to work. I'm new here at UTEP, and I work at the Center of Autonomous Sensing and Sampling for about 4 years, and we were 30 members, and it is important to let you know that this type of research has to be conducted in an interdisciplinary environment. So we are.
Laura, please, excuse me, Laura. I want to
Yes.
ask everybody to please mute their microphones. Thank you.
Yes, please mute the microphones. I'm listening a noise here, an echo. And if you cannot hear me, please let me know. I can see if the microphone is working well. So what I was saying is this platform is a foam top wing, and it's a top wing because it has two wings, as well as a sensor here integrated to measure the CO2 in the atmosphere. Again, in this research, we also need students with skills in maneuvering unmanned aerial systems. This is another type of platform that is very related to, believe it or not, to the autonomous boat, because it is a copter and it measures the boundary layer meteorology and in terms of the turbulence of the air and air humidity, and it also has other sensors. It can adapt to the wind, so it's always facing the upstream wind, and it's in the process of commercialization. Okay, so regarding my research, and this map that you are seeing was probably conducted, the data was conducted in 2016, and it was published like in 2018. But you can see here the orthophoto, and it is important to get ground control points to rectify the terrain, and also the DM. At that time, I was looking at submerged topography and how you can render a point cloud in a way that if the unmanned aerial system, if the UAS can capture the shallow waters, how can you correct these using some algorithms, or just the coefficient of refraction between the medium air and water, and get a decent measurement of submerged topography. So you can see here in the orthophoto, this is a reservoir, and is located in Oklahoma, in some area a land that is owned by the University of Oklahoma. And here we have the DM, and within the DM, the RGB is capturing the submerged topography, and the deep water reflects a lot of noise. So this is a way to correct for the refraction, and there are already algorithms that have been published. In this case, we were correcting by the refraction of the sun rays by the water, but at the same time by the pitch, roll and yaw of the aircraft. My students used to work a lot as well as in visualization and decision making. Probably this is the most important, in my case, slide of this manuscript, because it is the first step towards towards integrating machine learning algorithms to the mission planner and the mission of an autonomous system. So we can see here the main idea was how to take data in a way that is meaningful, and minimize redundancy. So we just used as a metric the SD here, and looking at the standard deviation in a cluster standard deviation in meters as a first initiative to look at the initial sampling, and then after applying this zonal adaptive sampling, how much gain we get from the data at capturing depth, water. The data that you are seeing is coming from a single beam and is looking at the depth of the water reservoir. And right now, I have, as I said, moving towards water bodies and rivers. So my students, especially students coming from a background of electrical and mechanical engineering, have been developing autonomous boat for the purpose of this research, starting with this bait boat. We built the shelf and then slowly integrating the electronic system in a way that the autonomous boat can go from one point to the other one. Is very small to carry a multi-beam, but you can tow, and it works well. The this boogie board with the multi-beam can be towed by this small boat. Now, the most robust platform that we have at the moment is this second version of the boat, and I will show you a video so you can see how it works. And so we tested in a controlled environment first. This is the first test that we had in a swimming pool. It has 4 thrusters. The omnidirectional travel comes from an adaptation when we adapted the platform or the functionality of the copterson to this boat. It has redundant flotation, and to be honest, it's very robust. We are trying to look at clone this boat in a small smaller or miniaturized platform. So as you remember, the copterson had that skill of being able to face always the upstream direction of the wind. The same characteristics we implemented in this boat in a way that the boat can adapt to the upstream currents of the river. In that way, when we are taking two-dimensional or cross-sections transects, we have a sensor that is looking at all the velocity discretized by grids within the depth. And so there are a lot of data that can potentially be taken with this autonomous boat. And I'm gonna move to another direction now, which is looking at geomorphologic changes in fluvial environments using a physically based numerical modeling. So the reason why I started working with remote sensing and sensor integration and platforms for autonomous systems is because it's very difficult to find data. It's very scarce in large rivers as well as in middle reaches, river reaches, and then it became a standalone project. So how we can see this type of research is very fundamental in the sense that any flow that has as an obstacle, what happened is that it experiment this separation flow or the separation zone, and eddies are generated downstream. And I'm pretty sure if you work in atmospheric science or oceanography, you will have this type of theory clear, because it's the same as if you were looking at turbulence in the boundary layer meteorology, same concept. Here is in the river. So what we are looking is at what I'm trying to study is the flow separation downstream, an obstacle in the case of the river that I'm working is a large canyon bound river. So the obstacle will be the debris fan that causes that constriction in the rapid. And that causes this separation zone or the wake region, and then the eddies circulating downstream, but at some point recirculating backwards towards the obstacle. And then let's look at an example of this in lateral recirculation zones. So what we are seeing here is a manuscript that was published in 2013 by Ferguson et al. And they were looking at separation zones and main geomorphologic and hydraulic currents in sharp meanders. So here is the velocity in meters per second, 0 blue to maximum 0.7 in red. And this is the simulation of the near bed and the simulation on the right-hand side of the near surface. So what happened is that in this transect, you can see here the velocity vectors depicted by arrows, right? And the velocity, of course, increases from the bed to 0 all the way maximum at the surface. In both cases, and more accentuated here in the near surface, we see that the velocity vectors at the inlet are coming downstream, and then due to this sharp change in direction of the river, there's this big eddy or lateral separation zone that recirculates upstream, in the inner side of the bend. The same happens in river confluences. In this case, we are looking at a simulation using eddy resolving models or large eddy simulation, in this case, techniques to look at the eddy structures in confluence. And how the confluence work is more complex because there's the main contributing stream and the secondary contributing stream. And what happened downstream is, first, yes, you can see in the inner side of the bend of the river a recirculation zone, but it also forms these shear plains. And that is captured by the simulation where you find the main stream and the contributing stream. Right here, you can see the pattern in the eddy structures, as well as they also generate vertical vortices right here downstream. Okay, so for the type of river set that I'm studying, we call it Fan Eddy complex, and this is the Colorado River along the Marble and Grand Canyon downstream the Glen Canyon Dam. So what we are seeing here is a conceptual diagram of the geomorphologic features and the flow features that occur in this type of river setting. So for example, there is a tributary that causes a debris fan, as I said before. This debris fan leads to a rapid or a constriction in the flow. And downstream the rapid, we see a pool. And within the pool, again, due to this obstacle, that's where the lateral separation zone occurs, and we can see the main channel downstream the rapid as well. So the lateral separation zone here is very important because that's where the reattachment bar and separation bar are formed, due to the fact that the velocity is very low, so that leads to deposition of sediment. For those of you who have been in the Grand Canyon, these fluvial deposits, also called sandbar beaches, are used for recreational purposes, for river rafting, and they also have value in terms of ecological resources. So looking at the impact of dam operation criteria to the downstream ecosystem, there are a lot of things that are happening in the ecosystem, which are changing dramatically from pre the construction of the dam and post the construction of the dam. So here we can see a picture of the pre-dam and the post-dam conditions. So the first thing is the sediment flux was reduced to about 6% of the flux prior to the dam. And right now it's only the Peria River that is the main source of remaining sediment. So some of the bars have been totally disappearing. There are a lot of efforts coming from the Bureau of Reclamation, from the Southwest Biological Science Center, and the Grand Canyon Monitoring and Research Center, and the USGS, to mitigate the erosion of these bars. So this picture, I took that in 2012 when I was in a campaign with the GCMRC, Grand Canyon Research and Monitoring Center. They have been taking data for about 30 years now or more. And that data includes multi-beam, includes topography of the bars, and as well as I have velocity in some transects that can be used to model validation. The bars are also important because they provide the backwater habitats for endangered species that are native in the Colorado River basin. So one of them is the humpback chub, and the other one, the Castonemus latipinis. They are in via of extinction, and there is another fish that is kind of populating, which is the trout. The bars are important as well because of these archaeological objects coming from the Native Americans that used to live in the Grand Canyon. The bars are the resource for burying these archaeological sites. Now, I am transitioning, and this is another river. So this is the Fraser River. It is also a large canyon-bound river, but the setting is very different, and the type of the nature of the behavior of the turbulence and the sediment changes in a way that during high flow events, this river, the depth is up to 60 meters, and you can see in this picture that is very narrow compared with the Colorado River. So what's happening here is that the flow is coming to the constrictions. It doesn't form any lateral separation zone, but there are flows that plunge down and erode the toes of the bar. And it happens in geological time scales. However, you can see the news here. This is in Vancouver and what we see is that in July 2019, there was an avalanche that trapped the salmon upstream the Fraser River. And the hypotheses are this was caused by these plunging flows. And this is the only slide that I have for physics. And those of you who know about, Navier-Stokes and advection diffusion equation could find it interesting. In general, the way that I construct or develop my models, I use OpenFOAM environment, which is a computational fluid software written in C++. Due to the fact that this is a large canyon-bound river, I use detached eddy simulation since I was concentrating in the macro-turbulence that occurred upstream of the riverbed. So what happened and how the detached eddy simulation treat the flow is that above a spatial filter, usually it is constrained by the grid cell, the properties or the flow is solved directly, and then the Reynolds stresses will be solved by a closure model. In this case, I use Spalar Alvarez to make that transition between large eddy simulation and Reynolds average Navier-Stokes equations right in the near bed grid cells. So detach is a hybrid between large eddy simulation and Reynolds average Navier-Stokes equations. This is the activity diagram of the software development. Overall, I start with the mesh generation. It's a structure mesh. So to develop the mesh, I had to create or develop two solvers. And then I applied the momentum equation, Navier-Stokes equation, coupled with the continuity equation. And then we will see that I validate the flow, the CFD model first. And then after that, I couple this model with the advection diffusion equation to look at suspended sediment. And at the end, I used the bed evolution model with the Exner equations to simulate the geomorphologic changes that occur in a transect of the river. So this is the computational domain, and you see the transect is in black, and the found eddy complexes here situated in or located in kilometer 97, downstream the Lee's Ferry, and this is the Lake Powell and the Glen Canyon Dam. And this is the Peria River. So the transect is 1.4 kilometers. And I use this inlet here to guarantee fully developed turbulence when the flow passes through the rapids. Okay, so these are this is the same scenario for velocity and concentration. So what you are seeing in your left-hand side here is the simulation of velocity using this turbulence resolving model. They are, so these are very computational expensive. You have to use parallelized modeling, parallelized modeling in the supercomputer. At that moment, I run about 120 processors for end domain decomposition, and it is capturing the turbulence that is coming from the rapids and dissipates towards the main channel. And you can see here the recirculation zone, the main eddy, and then the velocity is lower here in blue. And this is where the fluvial deposits are formed. I coupled this with the suspended sediment solver, and the concentration is close to the bed, but I use a limited supply of sediment. So this is what is called a synthetic scenario. It doesn't occur in the real world. It doesn't occur in this river, but I just want to make sure that I have these two, the viscous flow and the sediment transport solver, completely coupled and working properly. I have done a lot of model validation, not only for the flow, as I have also validated the geomorphologic changes, the erosion and depositional zones compared with multi-beam. As you can see, I used skill metrics coming from statistics, and such as the probability density function, the cumulative probability function. So the observed values are in red and the simulated in blue. And these are all the scores that I produce in order to get a holistic idea of how the model perform compared with observed values. Okay, so the model is three-dimensional. A lot of people ask for that, whether it's three-dimensional. Yes, it's three-dimensional, and it's also a supercomputer modeling of turbulence, suspended sediment, and riverbed evolution. What happened here is we are seeing the shear stress in black and white at the bed, and these are transects, cross-sectional transects of velocity, and velocity being blue, minimum to maximum around 4 meters per second in red. The question here is how the flow is driving the suspended sediment, and the interaction between the pulsation of the flow and the lateral separation zone and the main channel. So if you have a turbulence resolving model, you can see all the instantaneous velocities at every time scale and at every grid cell, something that is not possible to capture using a more parameterized model such as Reynolds average Navier-Stokes or any other parameterized model. So we can see here there are some pulsations, and right in the plane between this lateral recirculation zone and the main channel. And the pulsations are important to look at this exchange of sediment and the erosion and deposition of the sandbars. The simulation, you can see the deposition flux in cubic meter per second, and it was done in a scenario under unlimited supply of sediment. The blue represents erosion and red deposition. So under an unlimited supply of sediment, there's a lot of erosion coming from the inlet, and that erosion is depositing in the main eddy and here in the sandbars, as well as in the separation zone, that is another small bar. But there is not unlimited supply of sediment. As I said before, there is very limited supply of sediment. And what we are seeing here is the scenario where called a hydromorphodynamic model. So it's a fully coupled turbulence eddy resolving model with suspended sediment and movable riverbed. And these occurred in 4 hours of simulation at the peak of the 2008 controlled flood release from the Glen Canyon Dam. There have been a lot of initiatives to being able to restore this ecosystem, but one of them is those high flowing events coming from the gate of the Glen Canyon Dam, and it is a controlled flood release trying to drag the sediment from the bed to replenish these fluvial deposits. This is another work, again, going all the way to British Columbia in the Fraser River. And in this case, I'm trying to look at the issue of a scale. So basically, I create a laboratory scale eddy resolving model to look at the laboratory scale how the techniques that I use may not work, in the sense that I really had to impose a different closure model, different initial conditions to being able to represent the same behavior, such as look at fully resolving models. So the DES model applied to the field scale does not guarantee fully resolving turbulence in a small channel. So looking at the issue of scales and what type of techniques can be used in different spatial scales. I think it's time, right, Oscar?
Yes, yes, pretty close. So you certainly have a few more minutes.
I have a few more minutes. Okay. So the future steps in terms of fundamental research is that we have these earth science models. So from a physical perspective, you saw how you can develop a physically based model based on the momentum equation, based on continuity, based on advection diffusion equation. So it is a model that does not incur in a lot of parameterization. However, the model is not very efficient compared with machine learning models. It requires extensive computational expenses. So how can we merge these two type of models to get an augmented model. So for example, when we have a physically based model, it's really good to support the understanding of the nature of the, in this case, a river, but any type of, scenario. And then creating or imposing some machine learning can help to predict better, as at the same time save some computational expenses in terms of model preemption, for example. Then when we look at machine learning models, it's quite of the opposite. You have a lot of data, and that data is inferred through a large, no, the patterns are inferred through a large data set. And so using prior learning in machine learning based on physically based models can actually help to get a better machine learning model. Do you want me to, I can continue, but I also want to get questions from the audience. So it's up to you. I can show something else, or we can stop here.
Well, thank you, Laura. We've got 8 minutes for questions, so I think we should, yes. Let me see, what time are we finishing? At 1:30? No, go ahead, Laura, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so the last study is laboratory experiments of Sandbar bank erosion and the application to diurnal stage variations in the Grand Canyon. Again, in this case, we are not looking at a specific transect. I'm looking at all the sandbars that are located downstream the Glen Canyon Dam, and how the dam operation criteria can either trigger any type of mass failure in the face of the river. So I look at a laboratory experiment, which is a field scale or 2-dimensional sandbar. I conducted 22 experiments. And what this is doing is trying to mimic the table, the water table going up and down, and controlling that with the groundwater table and how those interact. And what I found is that the lowest slopes will experiment, of course, less mass failure, but no matter how fast is the up ramp or down ramp of the dam operation criteria, the bars are going to erode until the equilibrium slope. So it took me a long time to being able to set up this type of big lab scale and to get some results that can help decision makers to operate the Glen Canyon Dam in a way that is favorable to the bars and to look more at mass failures, right, occurring in these bars. And so I was able to capture seepage erosion and mass failures as well. And with this, I'm gonna finish because I wanna answer questions of the audience.
Very well. Well, thank you very much, Laura. I want to congratulate you. I see that your research fits very nicely within CESSRST because our interest is in environmental science and remote sensing technologies. So your environmental science is certainly very impressive, and so is your remote sensing technology. I want to congratulate Leonia on the quality and imaginative nature of your work, particularly that boat drone was fantastic. It didn't have any duct tape on it that I saw, but it's certainly a wonderful prototype Very interesting. And we do these things. We slap things together, and then we refine them. So that was very pleasant to see. And of course, the I'm an oceanographer, so the complexity of your hydraulic river systems is certainly much greater than what I have encountered before. I wanted to mention also the confluence of rivers because I found it very interesting. Um, I've been to the Amazon region, and I've found that when black water rivers and brown water rivers merge, you can actually see this turbulence during the mergence, the merging. And so congratulations and thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. And Shristi Tyagi, our communications director, has asked us all to please turn on your video so that she can get a picture. So while you gather your minds together as to what questions you would like to ask uh, Laura, well, and thank you, Walt, for that question. Do we have any more questions for Laura? Well, Laura, that was a very fine presentation. Like I say, I'm sure you
Quick
feel
question.
quite at home.
Sorry.
I have a
Yes.
question.
All
So
right.
I was muted. I didn't realize I was muted. I wanted to ask you, what was the dominant wavelength of the sediment that you were analyzing?
The wavelength in terms of bed forms, or
Yeah, in terms of the sediment that you were looking at, because I know I'm trying to do some work in the Tijuana estuary, looking at sediment load, and was wondering what your dominant wavelength was from the sediment that you were looking for.
yeah, I'm not sure what you mean in terms of wavelength. I I tried to model 5 different type of grain sizes that were representative of the fluvial sediments that are located in the Colorado River, coming from first from my laboratory experiments and second from data that was taken in the river. Now, in terms of the bed forms, if we are looking at the dunes, that is parameterized in the model. As I said, I near the bed, it's very difficult to capture everything, right? When you're looking at the large scale river where the depth is about 60 meters to 20 meters. So I was looking at the macro-turbulence and the separation zones, and then average the length of the bed forms at the river using just a parameter. And that's another question. Can you actually, can you can you simulate the initial motion and the bed forms and the grain sizes at the same time you're looking at macro turbulence? I'm not sure we are at that point right now. The computational expenses would be
Yeah, it sounds that sounds exciting.
very, and then the model would be highly unstable. But we will be there soon.
I think the data on the wavelength of those submerged dunes is probably in your echo sounder data.
Right. Oh, okay. I don't know. Maybe I had to come back to the slides.
Yeah, but it probably will be there. So Oscar,
Yes.
you're welcome to get in touch with Laura about this if you want.
Right.
Yes, definitely. I would appreciate that.
Yes, you can get in contact with me and look at the multi-beam data, and that way you can see the wavelength.
Okay, I will definitely do that after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Oscar. I wanted to note that Paul Alabi, our data manager, has posted the website where the video can be found of this presentation. So it's available to all of you. And so if there are any more questions, we'd be very pleased to hear them.
Sorry, if there are no more questions, if I can request, we couldn't get everyone in the picture.
if everybody can switch on their cameras later towards the end so we can take a collective picture, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Shristi. We'll turn on, everybody turn on your cameras, please, so that there are 29 of us and we're losing people rapidly. We had 37 at one point, I saw, which is very gratifying. So any further questions? If not, please smile for the camera.
1, 2,
Hello.
3.
Hola.
Okay, hello.
Hello, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Elena.
Although the DAS 3D model may not be suitable for simulations at large spatial scales and long-term process with limitations of supercomputers or super machines at this current time, the cost scaling of the method is then favorable since LES is not applied to resolutions of the relatively smaller structures that populate the boundary layer, for example, in rivers. So how can we use this model to study these events of macro-turbulence in these boundary layers? It is possible in some other methods?
In some other what?
In some other methodologies, by using some other methodologies? Or how can we use this model to study those events of macro-turbulence?
You can, okay, so the nature of, we have, okay, let's look at type of models, right? So we have these parameterized models all the way from Manning equations, which includes a lot of uncertainty in the flows, but they are, I mean, they are very simple, and you can get 100 years, let's say, you know, to design a bridge or something like that. Then we move towards these Reynolds average equations that just average the turbulence and the Reynolds stresses in a time period. If you move towards more, let's say, more precise, more accurate models, you will see detached eddy simulation models, large eddy simulation models, and then direct numerical simulation models. That would be the more accurate type of model that you will find. And there is not any numerical solution for the Navier-Stokes equation. That's one of the that's one of the problems of the century. I guess if someone resolved that question, they get $1 million, something like that. So for now, what we have is approximations to the momentum equation. And you can resolve micro-turbulence up to a spatial filter. It's just your cells have to be very small or infinitive small to capture all the cascades, you know, looking at the Kolmogorov spectrum, infinitive small to capture everything from large scales all the way to very small scales. And there are models of micro-turbulence, in fact, models that embedded the bed, look at the stochasticity of the grain sizes, at the same time those near bed grid cells. So, I mean, it depends on your research questions. I guess for atmospheric science, these LES models have been there for many years, maybe 20, 30 years. People have been working with LES just because when you look at the air, you know, the density is very low. So it is a very thin fluid, and the stability of the models are going to be, you know, better. The water has more momentum, more energy, and the models require a lot of attention in terms of how stable they are. But I don't know if there is a good solution. Just tackle one research question and go with the tool, right?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I hope that answers the question. I had a graduate student who had the Navier-Stokes equations tattooed on his ankle. So your kind of guy. But basically, what I believe that Laura's answer is, as long as your grid size is below the size of the processes that are happening, well, you have to parameterize, and these are what the modelers call the switches they throw in, or something like that. So it's a difficult question to answer. Thank you, Laura, for that answer. Let me see. The time is 2:30, so I think our time is up, Laura, and we appreciate so much that you've taken the time to prepare this talk and to talk to us and to share your knowledge with us, which is certainly very useful and very much down our road. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Jorge, for inviting me. This was
Okay.
this was a